The letter was nestled among the usual stack of bills and advertisements, its elegant script standing out against the mundane. I knew Ethan's handwriting anywhere, and the sight of it made my heart skip a beat. My name is Callie, and I've been a paralegal for over a decade. I've always prided myself on my ability to read between the lines, but nothing prepared me for the words that unfolded before me. Callie, it began, I have something important to ask you. Meet me tonight at our spot. Our spot was a quaint little restaurant by the river, where we first met 2 years ago. I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling up. Ethan wasn't usually one for grand gestures, so whatever he had to say must be significant. The day dragged on, each tick of the clock echoing the flutter of anticipation in my chest. As evening descended, I found myself at the restaurant, the soft glow of candlelight casting a warm hue over everything. Ethan was already there, his usual confident demeanor slightly frayed at the edges. He rose to greet me, his smile a bit too wide, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Callie, I'm glad you came, he said, pulling out a chair for me. There was a nervous energy in his movements, a telltale sign that something was up. We ordered our usual dishes, and as the waiter left, Ethan reached across the table, taking my hand in his. There's something I need to ask you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The anticipation in the air was palpable. He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future. I want us to be together, Callie. Will you marry me? The question hung between us, suspended in the air like a fragile promise. My heart soared, but before I could fully savor the moment, he added, I know it's a big step, and there's something else. I want us to live with my mother, Lorraine, at least for a while. His words landed like a stone in my stomach. Lorraine was a formidable woman, deeply attached to Ethan and not shy about expressing her traditional views. I'd always sensed she saw me as an outsider, someone who might whisk her son away from her influence. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, Ethan, I love you, and I want to be with you, but living with Lorraine, are you sure that's what you want? He squeezed my hand, his gaze earnest. I know it's not ideal, but it's important to her. She's been lonely since Dad passed, and I think it'd mean a lot to her. Besides, it's just temporary. I nodded, though my mind was racing. Love was supposed to conquer all, right? But could it withstand the weight of Lorraine's expectations and my own need for independence? As we left the restaurant, Ethan's arm around my shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The night was filled with the promise of a new chapter, yet I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into a story where the ending wasn't mine to write. Back at my apartment, I replayed the evening in my mind. Ethan's proposal was supposed to be a moment of pure joy, but instead, it felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. I wanted to believe that love would smooth out the edges, but a part of me couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about Lorraine. Her influence over Ethan was undeniable, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that this arrangement was more about her than us. I'd seen the way she looked at me, as if I were a threat to her carefully constructed world. The next morning, I woke with a renewed determination. I'd agreed to Ethan's plan, but I wasn't going to lose myself in the process. I'd find a way to make it work, to carve out a space for myself in a world that seemed increasingly claustrophobic. But as I prepared for the day, a thought lingered in the back of my mind. What if this was just the beginning? What if the real challenges were yet to come? And with that question echoing in my thoughts, I knew this was just the start of a journey that would test everything I believed about love, family, and justice. Moving into Lorraine's house was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was pristine, but in a way that felt more like a museum than a home. The floral wallpaper, the antique furniture, even the ticking grandfather clock in the hallway, it all screamed of a time long past. I tried to make it feel like home, adding a few of my own touches here and there, but Lorraine's presence was everywhere. The first few days were filled with polite exchanges and forced smiles. I could sense Lorraine watching me, her eyes like a hawk's, always assessing, always judging. Ethan, oblivious or perhaps unwilling to see the tension, continued to assure me that things would settle down. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Lorraine appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Callie, dear, I noticed you've been rearranging the kitchen. I'd appreciate it if you left things as they are. I have a system, you see. I nodded, swallowing the urge to argue. Of course, Lorraine. I was just trying to make things more convenient. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Convenient for whom, I wonder? The question hung in the air, laden with unspoken accusations. I busied myself with the cutlery, pretending not to notice the weight of her gaze. Dinner was a quiet affair, the clinking of silverware the only sound breaking the silence. Ethan was engrossed in his phone, likely checking some financial report. Lorraine, however, seemed intent on maintaining the tension. You know, Ethan, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet, I was talking to Mrs. Harper today. She mentioned how important it is for a wife to support her husband's career, especially in these uncertain times. Ethan nodded absently, not catching the pointed look she shot my way. I felt my grip tighten on my fork, but I forced a smile. I completely agree, Lorraine. It's a partnership after all. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she could see through my placating words. Yes, a partnership. But some roles are more supportive than others, don't you think? I bit back a retort, focusing instead on the salad in front of me. Ethan finally looked up, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Mom, Callie's been a great support. She's always there for me. Lorraine's smile was thin. I'm sure she is, dear. After dinner, Ethan and I retreated to our room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I could feel the frustration building, but I wasn't ready to confront it just yet. Instead, I focused on the small things, unpacking boxes, organizing our closet, trying to carve out a space that felt like ours. But the peace was short-lived. A few days later, I noticed some of my things had gone missing. At first, it was small items, a hairbrush, a book. I brushed it off, thinking I'd misplaced them in the chaos of moving. But then, my favorite necklace disappeared, and I knew something was amiss. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, when Lorraine was out, that I overheard Ethan on the phone with his sister, Tessa. His voice was low, urgent, and I couldn't help but strain to catch the words. Tessa, you can't keep doing this. Callie's going to notice. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Tessa's voice on the other end, though the words were indistinct. No, I haven't told her. But you need to stop. It's not fair to her. I stepped back, my mind racing. What wasn't fair? What was Tessa doing? My instincts as a paralegal kicked in, piecing together the fragments of conversation. Something was happening behind my back, and I needed to find out what. The revelation that Ethan might be hiding something from me was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just about the missing items anymore. It was about trust, about the foundation of our relationship. And as much as I wanted to confront him, I knew I needed more information. That night, as Ethan slept beside me, I lay awake, formulating a plan. I would find out what was going on, and I would do it without tipping my hand. The stakes were too high, and I couldn't afford to act on impulse. The next morning, I put on my best game face, determined to play the part of the unsuspecting fiancé. But inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, determination. Whatever was happening, I was going to get to the bottom of it. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that the cracks in our foundation were deeper than I'd realized. And as I went about my day, I couldn't shake the sense that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The tension in Lorraine's house was like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. The days dragged on, each one a careful balancing act between maintaining peace and uncovering the truth. I couldn't afford to let my suspicions fester any longer, so I took a bold step. While Ethan was at work and Lorraine was out for her weekly bridge game, I installed a hidden camera in the living room. It was a risky move, but I needed answers. That evening, as we sat in the living room, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Lorraine was flipping through a magazine, her disapproval of modern fashions evident in her occasional tuts. Ethan was engrossed in a financial report, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ethan, Lorraine said suddenly, her voice slicing through the silence. Have you spoken to Tessa recently? She mentioned she might stop by. Ethan glanced up, his expression guarded. Yeah, she said she might swing by this week. Why? Lorraine shrugged, her eyes never leaving the magazine. Just curious. It's been a while since we've all sat down together, you know. I watched Ethan closely, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. Something was definitely off, and I was determined to find out what. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I reviewed the footage from the camera. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold as I processed what I'd seen. Tessa had indeed come by, rifling through my things with a carelessness that spoke of entitlement. But it was the conversation between her and Ethan that truly shook me. "Ethan, you've got to help me out," Tessa had pleaded, her voice tinged with desperation. "I'm in over my head, and I need the money," Ethan had sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Tessa, I can't keep covering for you. Callie's starting to notice things going missing. But you promised." Tessa's voice had risen, panic edging her words. "You said you'd take care of it." Ethan had looked away, his face a mask of frustration. "I'll figure something out, but you need to stop taking things. It's not fair to Callie." The betrayal cut deep, but it was the mention of money that intrigued me. What was Tessa involved in that required such secrecy? And why was Ethan enabling her? I decided to confront Ethan, but I needed to tread carefully. If I came on too strong, he'd shut down, and I'd be left with nothing but more questions. Later that day, as we sat in the living room, I broached the subject. "Ethan, I've noticed some of my things have gone missing," I said, keeping my tone light. "Do you think Tessa might have borrowed them?" He stiffened, his eyes flickering to mine. "Why would you think that?" I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I just thought maybe she needed them for something. You know how sisters can be." Ethan relaxed slightly, but there was a wariness in his gaze. "I'll talk to her. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." I nodded, letting the matter drop for now. But inside, I was seething. His evasiveness only confirmed my suspicions, and I knew I needed to dig deeper. That evening, I called Simone my best friend and confidant. Her voice was a balm to my frayed nerves, grounding me as I recounted the latest developments. "Callie, this is serious," Simone said, her voice firm. "You can't let this slide. You need to confront him directly." "I know," I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. "But I need more information. I have a feeling there's more to this than just Tessa's antics." Simone sighed, her frustration palpable even through the phone. "Just be careful, okay? You don't know what you're dealing with yet." As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I couldn't let this go on. The longer I waited, the more tangled the web became. I needed to act, and soon. The next day, I decided to follow Tessa. It was a gamble, but I had to know what she was up to. I trailed her to a seedy part of town, watching as she entered a rundown building. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, wondering what I'd find. When Tessa emerged, she was with a young woman I didn't recognize. They exchanged a few words before parting ways, and I caught a glimpse of the woman's face. She was striking, with vibrant eyes and an air of innocence. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. As I drove home, my mind churned with possibilities. Who was this woman, and what was her connection to Tessa? And more importantly, how did she fit into the tangled mess that was my life? I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Whatever lay at the end of this journey, I was determined to see it through. Justice, revenge, or something else entirely, I'd find out soon enough. With the revelation of Tessa's theft and the mysterious woman still fresh in my mind, I knew it was time to confront Ethan. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when the ground beneath us was crumbling. But I needed to be strategic, to approach this with the same meticulous care I used in my work. That evening, as Ethan and I sat down for dinner, I decided to test the waters. Lorraine was out for the evening, and the house felt quieter, almost conspiratorial. I watched Ethan, noting the tension in his jaw, the way he fiddled with his fork. "Ethan," I began, keeping my tone casual, "I ran into someone interesting the other day. A young woman. She seemed to know Tessa." He looked up, a flicker of something, panic, maybe, crossing his face before he masked it with a smile. "Oh, Tessa knows a lot of people." "True," I said, taking a sip of water. "But this one seems special. I think her name was Violet." Ethan's hand stilled, his smile faltering. "Violet? I don't think I know of Violet." His denial was too quick, too practiced. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, but I kept my expression neutral. "Well, she seemed nice." Maybe she's new in town. Ethan nodded, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. I let the conversation drift to safer topics, but inside, I was boiling. He was lying to me, and I needed to know why. The next day, I decided to pay a visit to Simone. I needed her perspective, her unwavering support. As I sat in her cozy living room, the warmth and familiarity of our friendship wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. "Callie, you look like you've seen a ghost," Simone said, handing me a mug of tea. "What's going on?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's Ethan. I think he's hiding someone from me." I mentioned a woman named Violet, and he acted like he didn't know her, but I could tell he was lying. Simone leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "And this Violet, she's connected to Tessa?" "Seems like it." I saw them together, and Tessa seemed nervous. Simone nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You need to confront him, Callie. This isn't just about missing items anymore. It's about trust." I nodded, knowing she was right. But confronting Ethan was easier said than done. I needed to catch him off guard, to make sure he couldn't wriggle out of it with more lies. That evening, as Ethan and I sat in the living room, I decided to take the plunge. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up, his eyes wary. "About what?" "About Tessa, about Violet, about everything." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze head-on. "I know something's going on, and I need you to be honest with me." Ethan's expression shifted, a mix of guilt and defiance. "Callie, it's complicated. Tessa's been having a rough time, and I've been trying to help her." "Help her how?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. He hesitated, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "She got involved with some people. I was just trying to keep her out of trouble." "And Violet?" I asked, my voice softening slightly. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Violet's. She's a friend. She's been helping Tessa with some things." His vagueness only fueled my frustration. "Ethan, I need more than that. I need the truth." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I'm trying to protect you, Callie. I didn't want to drag you into this mess." I sat back, absorbing his words. Protect me? Or protect himself? The lines were blurred, and I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. As the silence stretched between us, I realized that this was a turning point. I had to decide whether to trust him or to dig deeper on my own. The stakes were higher than ever, and I couldn't afford to make a misstep. Later, as I lay in bed, my mind raced with possibilities. Ethan's words had only deepened the mystery, and I knew I couldn't rest until I uncovered the full truth. Whatever it took, I was ready to see this through to the end. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, a new resolve settled over me. Justice, revenge, protection, whatever my motivations, I would find the answers I sought. The game was far from over, and I was determined to win. The tension in the house was suffocating. Lorraine had returned from her evening out, her mood as icy as the winter air. I knew it was only a matter of time before she discovered Ethan's betrayal, and I had to act fast. I needed to expose the truth in a way that would leave no room for doubt or denial. I spent the next day meticulously arranging the evidence. I printed out emails and text messages, each one a piece of the puzzle that painted a damning picture of Ethan's infidelity. I placed them in a neat stack on the dining table, a silent testament to the chaos lurking beneath the surface of our lives. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I felt the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on me. Lorraine was unusually quiet, her eyes flicking between Ethan and me, as if sensing the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Ethan, oblivious to the evidence awaiting him, was engrossed in his phone. I watched him, my heart a mix of anger and sadness. How had it come to this? How had we ended up on opposite sides of a battlefield I never wanted to fight on? "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "there's something on the table you should look at." He glanced up, confusion clouding his features. "What is it?" "Just take a look," I replied, gesturing to the stack of papers. As Ethan picked up the evidence, Lorraine's curiosity got the better of her. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she read over his shoulder. The silence in the room was deafening, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan's face paled as he flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Callie, what is this?" he demanded, his voice tinged with desperation. "It's the truth, Ethan," I replied, meeting his gaze head-on. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Lorraine's eyes were wide, her voice a whisper. "Ethan, is this true?" Ethan looked between us, trapped in a web of his own making. "Mom, I can explain," he started, but Lorraine cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't want explanations. I want the truth," she snapped, her voice cold and demanding. Ethan's facade crumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes, it's true," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to close in around us, the walls echoing with the weight of his confession. Lorraine's face was a mask of shock and betrayal, her control slipping away as the reality of her son's actions hit her. I watched the scene unfold, a part of me feeling vindicated, another part aching with the loss of what could have been. I had wanted justice, but the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. As Lorraine turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and gratitude, I realized that this was a turning point. I had exposed the truth, but the consequences were far-reaching, affecting not just Ethan and me, but the entire family. "Callie, I didn't know," Lorraine said, her voice cracking with emotion. I nodded, understanding her pain all too well. "I know, Lorraine. I just couldn't keep it to myself any longer." The silence that followed was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But before I could process what had happened, a new revelation hit me like a freight train. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside, "I saw Tessa with a woman named Violet." "Who is she?" Ethan's eyes widened, panic flaring in their depths. "Callie, who is she, Ethan?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. She's someone I met through work," he admitted, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to get this far. The admission hung in the air, a new layer of betrayal added to the already tangled mess. I felt my resolve harden, the need for justice burning brighter than ever. As the night wore on, I realized that my understanding of revenge and justice had shifted. It wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about finding a way to move forward, to reclaim my life from the wreckage Ethan had left behind. And as I lay in bed that night, the weight of the day pressing down on me, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength to see it through. The air was thick with tension as we gathered around the dining table for what would be an unforgettable family dinner. Lorraine had insisted on it, wanting to maintain some semblance of normalcy, though we all knew the evening was anything but normal. I watched Ethan, his face a mask of forced calm, as he picked at his food, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Lorraine, ever the matriarch, cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the silence. "Ethan, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." Ethan sighed, setting down his fork. "Mom, I've already explained." "No, Ethan," she interrupted, her tone firm. "You've made excuses. Now, I want the truth. All of it." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the weight of her words settled over us. I sat back, observing the unfolding drama, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. This was the moment I had orchestrated, yet the reality of it was far more painful than I'd anticipated. Ethan hesitated, glancing at me, then back at Lorraine. "I messed up, okay? I made some bad decisions, but I was trying to fix things." "Fix things?" Lorraine's voice was incredulous, her disbelief palpable. "By lying to everyone? By dragging Callie into this mess?" Ethan's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "But you did," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You hurt all of us, Ethan." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and desperation. "Callie, save it, Ethan." I cut him off, the words sharper than I intended. "I'm done listening to your half-truths." The silence that followed was suffocating, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But before the tension could dissipate, the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile quiet. Lorraine rose to answer it, her movements stiff and mechanical. A moment later, she returned with Tessa in tow, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. "Tessa, what are you doing here?" Ethan asked, surprise and irritation lacing his voice. "I needed to talk to you," Tessa replied, her gaze darting nervously between us. Lorraine gestured for her to sit, her patience clearly wearing thin. "We're all ears, Tessa." Tessa hesitated, wringing her hands. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I was just trying to help a friend." "A friend?" Lorraine echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "What friend?" "Violet," Tessa admitted, her voice small. "She got into some trouble, and I thought I could help." The revelation hung in the air, a new layer of complexity added to the tangled web. I felt my heart sink, the situation spiraling further out of control. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his features. "Tessa, you should have told me. We could have figured something out together." "I didn't want to drag you into it," Tessa replied, her voice cracking. "I thought I could handle it on my own." The room was silent, each of us grappling with the implications of Tessa's confession. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, the enormity of the situation overwhelming in its complexity. As the evening wore on, the reality of our fractured family dynamics became painfully clear. Lorraine, once so sure of her influence, now seemed lost, her control slipping away with each new revelation. Ethan, caught in a web of his own making, was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. And Tessa, desperate for validation, had unwittingly dragged us all into her mess. I watched them, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. I had wanted justice, but at what cost? The lines between right and wrong had blurred, leaving me questioning my own motivations. And as I sat there, surrounded by the debris of our once promising future, I realized that this was my lowest point. The path to resolution seemed impossible, the prospect of moving forward daunting in its uncertainty. But even in the midst of despair, a flicker of determination remained. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to give up now. I would find a way to navigate the chaos, to reclaim my life from the wreckage. As the night drew to a close, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But I was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength to endure. Whatever came next, I would see it through, determined to emerge from the darkness stronger than before. The day began like any other, but I felt the tension in the air, an electric charge that promised change. I knew that today, everything would come to a head. Ethan had been avoiding me since the dinner, and Lorraine's silence was a testament to her shock and disappointment. I needed to confront Ethan, to make him face the consequences of his actions, and there was no more room for delay. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room, I gathered my resolve. I found Ethan in his office, surrounded by papers and the remnants of his once carefully constructed life. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mix of weariness and defensiveness. "Callie," he began, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "No more excuses, Ethan. We need to talk." He nodded, setting aside the papers. "I know. I've been a mess, and I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I replied, my voice steady. "You've hurt everyone around you, and it's time you own up to it." Ethan's gaze dropped, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could handle it, but everything spiraled out of control." I took a deep breath, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me. "You need to fix this, Ethan. Not just for me, but for yourself." He looked up, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "I will. I promise." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, echoing through the house. We both froze, the unexpected interruption adding a new layer of tension. Lorraine answered the door, her voice carrying through the hallway. "Ethan, it's for you." Ethan and I exchanged a glance, then made our way to the door. Standing there was a stern-looking man in a suit, a folder clutched in his hand. "Mr. Caldwell?" the man asked, his tone professional. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, his voice wary. The man handed him the folder. "I'm here on behalf of the bank. We need to discuss the foreclosure proceedings." The words hit like a punch to the gut, the reality of Ethan's financial instability crashing down on us. Lorraine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Ethan took the folder, his hands shaking. "I thought I had more time," he muttered, flipping through the papers. The man shook his head. "I'm afraid not. We'll need to resolve this matter quickly." As the man left, The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan stood there, the weight of his choices visibly crushing him. I watched him, feeling a mix of anger and pity. This was the moment I had been waiting for, yet it felt hollow. "Ethan," I said softly, "you need to face this. Running away won't solve anything." He nodded, his expression one of defeat. "I know. I just—" Before he could finish, Tessa appeared, her face pale and drawn. "Ethan," I heard. "I'm so sorry." Ethan turned to her, his frustration boiling over. "Tessa, this isn't just about me. You dragged us all into this mess." Tessa flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to help Violet." "Violet?" Lorraine's voice cut through the tension, her confusion evident. "What does she have to do with this?" Tessa hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Violet's been struggling, and I tried to help her, but it backfired. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The room was silent, each of us grappling with the tangled web of lies and half-truths. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, the enormity of the situation overwhelming in its complexity. But as I looked around, a new resolve took hold. This was my chance to take control, to find a way forward. I stepped forward, meeting Ethan's gaze. "Ethan, you need to be honest with everyone. It's the only way to start fixing this." He nodded, his expression one of determination. "You're right, Callie. I'll do whatever it takes." The promise hung in the air, a fragile hope in the midst of chaos. As the reality of the situation settled over us, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The confrontation had brought us face to face with the themes of justice and redemption, forcing us to reevaluate our choices and motivations. And as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of our fractured lives, I knew that we had the strength to rebuild, to find a new path forward. The journey wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that I had the power to shape my own destiny. Whatever came next, I would see it through, determined to emerge stronger and wiser than before. A few weeks had passed since the tumultuous events that had upended our lives. I had moved out of Lorraine's house and into a cozy apartment that overlooked a small park. It was a space that felt entirely my own, a sanctuary where I could begin to piece together the fragments of my life. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the hardwood floors. I sipped my coffee, savoring the quietude that had been so elusive in recent months. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Lorraine, asking if we could meet for lunch. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed. It was time for closure, for all of us. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted Lorraine sitting at a corner table, her expression a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She stood as I approached, greeting me with a tentative smile. "Callie, thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Of course, Lorraine," I replied, taking a seat. "I think we both need this." She nodded, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. I wanted to apologize for everything. I was so focused on controlling the situation that I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. I shook my head gently. "We all made mistakes, Lorraine. What matters is how we move forward." She smiled, a hint of relief in her eyes. "Ethan's trying to make things right. He's working with the bank to sort out the financial mess, and he's seeing a counselor." "That's good to hear," I said, genuinely pleased. "He needs to find his own path, just like I did." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace between us. Lorraine was still the formidable woman I'd always known, but there was a vulnerability there now, a willingness to change. As we finished our meal, Lorraine reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "Thank you, Callie, for everything. You've been stronger than I ever gave you credit for." I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "We're all stronger than we think." After lunch, I took a leisurely walk through the park, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The path had been fraught with challenges, but each one had taught me something valuable about myself and the people around me. Back at my apartment, I found a note slipped under the door. It was from Violet. She wanted to meet to clear the air. I hesitated, memories of her involvement with Ethan and Tessa still raw. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop. Violet was already there when I arrived, her camera slung over her shoulder. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of apology and hope. "Callie, I'm so sorry for everything," she began, her voice earnest. "I didn't know the full story. I never meant to cause any trouble." I studied her for a moment, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I believe you, Violet. We were all caught up in something bigger than ourselves." She nodded, relief washing over her features. "I've been working on my photography, trying to find my own way. I'd love to show you some of my work." A small smile tugged at my lips. "I'd like that." As Violet showed me her photos, I was struck by her talent, the way she captured the world with a unique perspective. It was clear that she had found her calling, and I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that I had played a part in her journey. Our conversation drifted to future plans, and I realized that this unexpected friendship was a testament to the power of forgiveness and growth. We were both moving forward, carving out new paths from the chaos of our pasts. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure settling over me. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of understanding and peace. I had faced the themes of revenge and justice head-on, and in doing so, had found a deeper sense of self. And yet, as I walked home, a lingering question remained. What would the future hold for all of us? The uncertainty was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in my ability to navigate the complexities of life. The story wasn't over, but I was ready for the next chapter, whatever it might bring. With each step, I felt lighter, more certain of the path I was on. The future was wide open, and I was ready to meet it head-on, armed with the lessons of the past and the promise of a new beginning.